All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, May 23rd, and we are here at the start of week 4. And we will start out with a bit of peer review, and we will treat this session, much like our previous sessions, with a couple of submissions from week 3. And then we'll switch it over to talk about the new assignments coming up in the final week. Our main focus in this for this final week is to kind of sum everything up and wrap up not only the projects but also the information and our different discussion topics. So we will get into what is coming up here in our final week. If you have any sort of questions as we wrap everything up about the projects, the assignments, any submissions, please let me know so that we can finalize everything here in week 4 before we move on to the next month. So we have 2 main submissions from this month, and then we have a couple of previous submissions that we will switch over to and discuss those. So our first submission here, let me switch over here, is, we have a 2D platformer video from week 2, and we'll take a listen to this. And we also have a chiptune composition here that we will take a listen to. So that's what we have in store. Let's go ahead. Let me just double check that we can hear this, that this is going to work. All right. Put the volume down here. I think this should be fine. I really like the groove of the music. The sound effects are the original sound effects, so would definitely like to hear maybe the final version, so we can kind of match our music and sound effects together. So that'll be a concern, but I think the music loops well. Transitions nicely. The only other thing I would suggest for this as a demo video is that you don't play it like a game and you show off all of the different variations. So you've got the intros, the main loops, and the endings. The endings aren't going to get triggered unless you lose all of your health, so I would probably jump down the bottom every once in a while or purposely get hit. Once you show off the gameplay, then you can make sure to trigger all of the other sounds. So let me go back over here and catch an intro. 2, 3, 4. Alright, so the intros transition into the main loops nicely. Then it switches over to the next main loop. That works. It's got a slightly different groove to it. Alright, so let's see if we can get to an ending here. There it comes. Okay, well, the music didn't transition at that point. It didn't feel like it actually stopped. All right, so I would watch out for the endings, and I would trigger more variations there.
How's that been?
And yeah, watch out and try to create a stronger ending overall so that the music rounds out and finishes the whole kind of musical idea before the game kind of starts over again. Here in the chat, my ending, I didn't finish, I ran out of time to fade it out. Okay. So it basically feels like it just plays and stops. So now that you kind of see how it sets up and plays back, those are the types of things that really don't show themselves until you get everything together. And this is why it's definitely a process of revision, because you receive the project and you read through everything and understand it, and you create a overall idea and direction to go with your music, and you get everything together and you put it into the game, and maybe parts of it work, maybe parts of it don't work. You have to kind of see the different issues that are at hand, and a bit of troubleshooting and figuring out. Sometimes it's going back to the DAW, or a lot of times, often it's going back to the DAW and fiddling with your music and recomposing different sections of it, and then bouncing it back out, getting it back in the game, and testing it out. So overall, I think the vibe works very well for the game. Maybe a little bit more energy overall, certainly in the intros and endings, and would also like to see the final version with the music and sound effects running. All right, nice work. And for our second submission here, oops. Oh, come on. There we go. We have one of the chiptune compositions. Here you have the restrictions. The main focus of the project is understanding and writing a composition within the restrictions of a limited music system like the original Nintendo. So you have 4 basic channels of really simple waveforms like sawtooth, square waves, triangle waves, actually not even sawtooth, sine waves, triangle waves, square waves, and noise channels. And creating those, with those simple palette of sounds, creating a pretty complex composition. So the real challenge here is not so much the composition, because we really leave it wide open to the direction that you want to take it, but it's writing within these restrictions. The other things we're listening for is that there certainly is drums, harmony, melody, and that the melodic line changes lead instruments at some point. The one thing that some of these original game systems could do is switch between multiple different sounds very quickly. That's how you got a sense of many more effects or many more sounds being played at the same time. So let's go ahead and check out our chiptune submission here. Okay, building up nicely. I think I really like the kind of staccato nature of the bass line, and the lead line works well for these compositions. Like the build. Ooh, real nice. Cool. Nice rhythmic changes. There's great variation all the way through. Hey, very good. So a lot to work with there. Definitely hit a nice quality mark, even within the restrictions. There was great grooves in there, kind of melodic, really sort of groovy and memorable riffs overall from the melody. The kind of, as I said, the kind of staccato nature of some of those grooves there in the middle, right through here. So this stuff with these sounds, if you are not using octaves and perfect fourths and fifths, can start really getting muddy and kind of jumbled up. And so using much more staccato kind of staccato notes will allow you that space in between to give you the bass that you're looking for and the kind of speed and movement. Then there was one part in here that had kind of the sustained chords that were used sparingly, which is good. That right there. So that kind of gives you a feel of what's coming up. And then even when it kind of builds here and takes over, there's some, even though there's like the sustained, more kind of pad elements, it doesn't get too jumbled up. So you got the drums, you got a bass, melody, counter melody. Kind of goes back to the groove to round everything out. And a change here towards the end. All right, excellent. Good stuff. The only thing that I might suggest is the beginning of it. And as a demo, I would say hit them with the best stuff first, so you really grab their attention. And that is either somewhere in here, getting into this groove quicker, or even starting with something as big as this. So it really grabs their attention, and then kind of falling back down and then building back up. I always am kind of wary about slow build-ups where you kind of add instrument by instrument layer because of how, let's see, it takes a while to get there. So I'm 10 seconds in. I haven't hit like much of what's about to happen. All right, so about 15 seconds in, I've hit most of it, and by this point I got a good groove going on. So about this point, most people are gonna move on to the next thing, often. And that's really when it starts getting good, because then when you start building up, and I have to basically make it to 45 seconds. Make it to 45 seconds to hit the really good stuff. So that's just a consideration overall. Basically, what is it used for? Where is it going? Obviously, starting with all that power in the beginning may not make sense for when it's actually used in a game or whatever it finally ends up for, or like on an album or anything like that. But as a demo, you often want to hit them hard pretty quickly because they're flipping through so quick. But overall, hits the mark. Definitely good stuff to work with. So we have our 2 submissions here, and we are going to turn it over to our previous archive where we go into a few more videos and few more reviews of Angry Bots submissions. So check that out. And we are going to take the time in the beginning of our session today to do a bit of peer review, much in the same way that we've done on our first Wednesday class each week. And hopefully you've had an ample amount of time to digest the project and get an opportunity to play it and check it out, so that you had a solid approach to this composition. So I have 4 submissions here to listen to, and they are set up. Let's do this. Let's make this a little bit smaller. They are set up with all of the ambient cues over here in the first kind of column here. Here in the middle, here in the middle we have the action cues, and each student submission has their own track, so it's not kind of stacked up anyway. And then we have the 3 stinger cues over here. So we'll take a listen to those and discuss the overall approach for this Angry Bots composition. And then we will also dive into the final round of assignments here in week 4. The last week is mainly focused on wrapping up topics and the projects, and then talking about how do you take the knowledge and the work that you've done in the class and apply it beyond the class. And hopefully one of the big purposes of the class is that you are introduced to this side of the industry, working on music for game projects, and you get a sense of what it's all about, and shows you that your music is just as viable in a video game as any other format, so that if these types of projects come your way, you get a bit of an understanding of what type of work it might entail. And hold on just a sec. I have to pause. One moment. All right, sorry about that. And so to pick back up, we're going to take a listen to the submissions here from the... can't see my screen. Hold on. There we go. So we will start out by listening to these projects, and then I was going through a discussion of week 4. Again, the focus is to take all of the ideas and the material that you've learned and talk about how to apply it beyond the class. So the focus of the projects and the material that you learn and work on is to have a working game project with your custom music and sound effects that you can show off to clients and future employers, and add it to a demo reel, add it to a portfolio, and talk about how you can best demonstrate and show off the work that you have accomplished in not only this class, but hopefully it piques your interest and you investigate kind of more of this direction in the games industry. So our last round of assignments here in week 4 and the topics overall talk about how do you take the projects and put them in the best form so that you can demo them, show them off, have them available. Because music for a game, well, music that is intended for a game, by itself is difficult to necessarily understand and put in context. The best way to show off your music for a game is to actually put it into the game. And we have the opportunity of doing that for each one of our projects this month. And so having some sort of means to demonstrate your music in the context of a game, and we'll talk about the advantages of you have the game itself, the music, the sound effects, and the Mac application that is the game that you've hopefully had the opportunity. Well, you did a round of video captures for 2D platformer, so You created all the music, you created all the sound effects, you placed it into the game, played the game, tested it out, listened to it, maybe took the opportunity to make any changes or make any updates to it, and did a video capture or video representation of that music and sound effects working in the game. So our projects through this week and our topics, certainly in our next topics in the class on Friday, we will discuss how do you find clients, how do you find projects, how do you get started in the industry, how do you take what you've learned and apply it beyond the class. So that's generally the direction and intention for week 4. We'll start here with these projects, and then we've got a few assignments to discuss for the rest of week 4. All right, so let's dive into our discussion or review of Angry Bots. We've got 4 submissions here, and I'll start out by doing an overview or talking about an overall approach to this composition and to the music for this game. We'll talk about how ambient and action are working together for this project and where the stingers fit into the progression of the music, and then we'll take a listen to each one of them and see what we have with the submissions here. So as I mentioned before, this first column, we have 4 student submissions. Every student has their own track with the 7 audio files for this project. And we have the first column here are all of the ambient cues. The main function of the music soundtrack for our Angry Bots game is the idea of switching back and forth between ambient and action. And they're represented in a series of WAV files here. The ambient music is going to be heard most often. If nothing else is happening in the game, the player will hear the ambient cue. So we discussed it needs to be about a minute or 2 minutes long, so that it has ample time to develop and change and explore new ideas. Much more. So far, we've written in 4-bar loops, 8-bar or 2-bar loops, 4, 8, 16-bar loops, things like that. And then now we want to use these ambient cues to have a bit more time to develop ideas. So whether that is change and variation and development in melody and harmony, or whether it is adding and subtracting instrumentation and changing the tone and aesthetic over the course of the cue, the ambient cue does not mean the genre of ambient music or anything too simple or slow or like a single drone that doesn't change or have any sort of modulation to it. You can have drums, bass, you can have harmony and melody and more of a traditional structure to the music through the ambient cue, or it can be more towards the idea of tones and soundscape and building a foundation for this composition through the use of musical sound design, using instruments beyond their range or using them in unique and interesting ways, using a lot of interesting effects. So it does not have to be a traditional approach to it doesn't have to be a traditional musical approach. That's more of what I'm saying. But it can develop ideas and have a lot more freedom in its kind of texture of the sound. It needs to loop so that by the time it reaches the end of the file, it needs to sonically and through the mix and through the volume, it needs to be able to return back to the front of the file with no issue. What else? The ambient cue. One of the main things that we are listening for in this composition is an intensity level difference between the ambient cue and the action cues. The ambient cues can have drums and bass and kind of power and intensity and strength to it, but however strong the ambient cue is, the action cues just need to be bigger and louder and stronger than that. So you typically don't want to have too much power, too much energy or percussion rhythm in the ambient cue, and leave some of that, or leave a place to go up higher in the action cues. Action cues typically bring the drums and the percussion and the power and the intensity necessary to mimic the battles with the robots. So now, yep, that'll send us over here. Well, I guess I could start out looking at these 4 ambient cues. Visually, they look like they're set up correctly. They look like from the beginning to end, they're set up ready to loop. And a level-wise, they look like they are at appropriate volume. So, at least visually, looks like it works out. The action cues. The action cues are heard during the battles or the engagement with the robots. Each one of the robots jumps awake and attacks in some sort of way. And our challenge here is, how do we go back and forth between the lower intensity ambient music and the higher intensity action music? So we want to make sure that there is a striking difference between ambient and action. Each robot has its own action cue or theme. You have more opportunity to switch instrumentation and have more variation in your instruments from one cue to the next. The buzzer cue does not necessarily need to sound like the mech cue or the action or the spider cue. Keeping it in a similar key, keeping it at a similar tempo helps with transition back and forth, but the instrumentation can vary and should, so that each robot has its own thematic idea or voice, so you know what's coming after you. Even if it comes coming from off the screen, you still know, even before you see it, which robot is coming, because you hear their thematic music. 8-bar cues, the battles are really quite short. Hopefully you've had the opportunity, now that you've made the music, to actually put it in the game and test it out. The way the music transitions between ambient and action can be one of the more challenging elements of this, because when you are going from a lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music, it's an immediate hard cut and switch. Then when the battle is over and you're returning from action back down to ambient, then that's going to happen over a 3-second crossfade. The action music will continue playing for 3 seconds while the ambient cue fades in, action cue fades out, and it returns back to that ambient piece of music and sits there for as long as it needs to before the next battle happens. So 8-bar loops, intensity, power, we want to make sure that level-wise, sometimes we get like reverse dynamics between the ambient and the action, where the ambient doesn't have a lot of energy in the rhythm, but there's a lot of power and low-end bass in their choice of instruments. So sometimes the ambient cue can actually be stronger in volume than the action cue. So we want to watch out for those sorts of variations in dynamics between the two. So these cues look like they're ready to go. The only one that I just noticed right now is this one looks to be basically half the length of the other ones. So you'll need to extend out that particular cue. They all look like they're strong and level and volume and intensity. So they should, well, we'll see how they nicely they transition back and forth. Okay, this one here in the chat. This one's set to a different tempo. Is it double? Looks like it's perfectly half of the other one, so it might be double. Okay, cool. Then that works. We'll take a listen to it. It depends on, well, we'll get to it. It depends on if what elements are doubled. You might, I don't know so much about creating, I guess it's 8 bars. It's just playing twice as fast, but it's half the length. So while, yes, the assignment says 8 bars, this might be something, if everything's sped up, then it might need to be extended twice as long so that you have whatever your phrasing is here has enough time to develop in the same amount of time as the other one. So whatever. So we'll take a listen to it. The good thing is that in all that is it's all intentional, so that's very good. So the stingers are meant to add embellishment and signal the change from ambient to action, or really signal the battles happening in the game. You'll hear it every single time a battle starts. The game randomly chooses one of your 3 stinger cues to play and plays it at the exact same time that the action cues come in. This provides a small transition sound that is a bit random. Each robot has its own action cue. And every single time you encounter the buzzer or the mech or the spider, it's going to play that exact same piece of music. So this stinger provides a little variation as a little randomization each time those cues start. You want to make sure that they are strong impacts at the front and they fade out to silence. All of these look like they are the correct shape, where you are starting out with a strong waveform at the front and it tails off relatively quickly down to silence. You want to make sure it's everything reaches silence. So most of these look like they're probably really long reverb tails. This one looks like it might get a little cut off. These look like they might get a little cut off. These should be all right because they actually reach silence. Again, we'll have to listen to them if they're cymbal crashes or reverb tails. But if they do reach silence for a little bit and you can cut it down, that always helps to reduce overall file size. Not particularly to our project because the size of the files and the amount of files aren't really going to ever get all that big. But in a larger sense, you should just get into a habit of cutting off any tails that are unnecessary to over thousands and thousands of audio files in a game. It reduces file size. So again, visually everything looks set up correctly. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a listen. Make sure that this is working correctly. All right, so we'll start out with our first ambient loop here. I like the groove already. We've got elements that are added in every couple of bars. Now that I hear this and looking at the waveform, it looks like it builds over time. Yeah, so each time around there's a new instrument added. Changes to maybe the progression a bit or the drums. but you want to make sure anything that's added in is taken out before it loops. There's good little melodic stuff in there. So probably 3/4 through here, you should start taking things out. So when it loops back around, it can return back to the less instrumentation. All right, let's check the loop. Yeah, the cymbal crash works as it goes around, but there's a lot of instrumentation that's kind of like sucked out, and you want to make sure that you want to kind of lose the player over this minute or two worth of music. You want to kind of lose the player so that they don't know where the loop happens. So musically and compositionally, I think it works well. I like the groove, I like the melodic ideas and the changes through there. You just probably need to take some time to bring it back out before it loops back around. Let's do 3 action cues. All right, let me go. So I think the drum pattern, the double time drum pattern in the buzzer and the spider cue, it feels too sped up, and it's not the tempo because it's probably within the same tempo or a double of that. The fact of you don't need to double everything. From the drum kit, you can double the hi-hat, but the kick, certainly the kick doesn't need to be as fast as it is or as frequent as it is, and the snare could probably even come back a bit. And over here, like you could, yeah, keep the snare where that is on the 2 and 4, and then work with doubling certain aspects of it, but will reduce the hurried nature that you hear, and it's kind of a sudden jump. It's kind of a sudden jump there to double those up. Like there's some melodic stuff that is that works double time in the spider cue. I believe it could actually come out a little bit more forward in the mix. That stuff could be more present and help the pacing of everything without speeding up the drums. Let's do 3 stingers. Cool. I think the second two are going to be able to be heard better because they have a bit more in the higher range, higher frequencies. The delayed modulation thing in this first stinger could either come up in volume or add something in a higher register to be able to stick through, especially when it goes over to this. Oops, it goes over here. It's very constant, the sound, so you want to make sure that those will cut through when these action cues come in. Let's see. Test it out here. I can hear the kick, but missing more of the synth sound. Let's do like this one. Yeah, I really like the rise in there because it helps the anticipation. Okay. All right. Very good. So yeah, watch the building in the ambient cue, build and then return back down. Watch the doubling up of the percussion through the action cues, and maybe a little bit something to cut through for that first stinger cue. All right, very good. Let's try our next one here, starting out with the ambient cue. It sounds. I like some of those big hits. Although, yeah, it does get. Feels like it pushes up against the limiter, is being squashed back a little bit. But between those big hits, you've got the pads with almost like a kind of a glissy kind of sound with the stuff in the higher frequencies. I was thinking something like an arpeggiated bass line that helps establish the rhythm. Like something in there that's almost a pulse, so that when these action cues come in, you know generally where it was at. Yeah, and on the dark and eerie side, you have a lot of the frequencies, some parts of that pad or whatever have a lot of stuff going on in the higher range, and there maybe could be a little bit more in the lower end. It depends on my headphones and whatnot, but let's go ahead and jump over here. Let's do this. Cool. I like the second half of this buzzer action cue, like the rhythm that you have going on there. This one seems a little too sparse or slow. It kind of speeds up here, something kind of happening in the background that helps the pacing, and that could be extended out. That's also also towards the idea of, with the difference in the first two bars in this, or sorry, the first four bars, the second four bars of this, I know where I am in the music. So when it loops back around, I'm here in the less intense area. Then over here it comes in with a little bit more percussion and pacing to it. So then on the mech, I think the mech works well. It's I'm counting these at, let me count along with it and see where the pace is, because if I was counting on a snare on the 2 and 4, these would be 4-bar loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. All depends on where you're, where you're counting it, which helps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like this helps to infer the pacing at that kind of double time feel where those snares hit. And 1, 2, 3. Here, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. I definitely think this could be extended out. I definitely like what you do here, and all the quick movement. It really works for the spider. But I would just extend it out another 4 bars to make it less repetitive than these over here. I mean, no, to make sure it is less repetitive like these over here, because these aren't repetitive. So that's what I hear there. Action. No, stingers. Cool. Excellent. I think they work very well. They have really cool tails at the end. Make sure the end of the file doesn't cut that off. Make sure it fades all the way to silence. They could probably be louder in volume in the, like when you bounce it, and these first two have a pretty strong impact at the front, but this one might have a little bit more like a bassy hit, or it's kind of there in the it's there in the second part. So yeah, just if you could just pull more intensity out so that they compete nicely against the action cues. But as for aesthetic and vibe and instrument choice and intensity difference, I think all the thick synths and big hits work well in the ambient cue. I think there's some good grooves and percussive ideas through here, and it's more of formatting it and how they're going to work together. So good job. Another good one to check out. We'll go down here and try the next one. Really cool groove and vibe through here. I almost would like to hear you start right here in the cue. Some of that is, this is a little too light, and where it ends over here, with the instruments that you have over here, when it comes back over here, this is a little too light. Not a huge fan of kind of the one-note arpeggio movement that you kind of get through here. But once you reach here with all the good low end, I think it's more appropriately intense, like the second half. Now, I wouldn't just cut it off. I would extend it out forward into this cue and just develop it. I like that it kind of breaks down through here and comes back. I just need to make sure that where it ends over here ties nicely back to the front. So, cool, groove and sound through there. Action cues, buzzer action. So I like, let's see, the kind of pace through here works. Let me just hear it against this again. All right, so I think tempo-wise, these don't, or the action cues don't match the ambient cues. That will create a bit of a kind of a jarring transition when it goes from ambient to action. The first half and the second half of this buzzer action cue are a bit too similar overall. I really like the mech. I think the instrumentation and the intensity works well. Now, I think the percussion of the spider cue sounds similar to the buzzer cue. So you could probably create a bit more variation through those. And they have harmonic progressions, but not a real strong melodic lead line. All right. So I would probably try to make this ambient cue and the action cues be halftime and double time relative to each other. Looking at the waveforms, probably a bit more attack and impact from the stingers. Make sure, number one, they don't get cut off at the end. They could probably extend and be longer to have room for reverb tail or more decay. There's a drum or an impact hit that is common between all three of them and should probably not be reused to create a bit more variation from one to the next. So I like what they're doing. I think they sound dark and intense. So make sure, they have a little bit more impact at the front, extend out a little bit longer, and have a little bit more change from one to the next. All right, very good. And we'll try one more here with our ambient cue. Alright, so the kick and the snare do well to create a little bit of rhythm, kind of foreshadow what's coming up. I like the grit of the lead distorted line. Loops nicely. Yeah, I was a bit worried there until the distorted line comes in. Could almost even have something else that maybe towards the second half that comes in and responds to that guitar to explore another idea. And we'll jump up here to the action cues. I feel you should try more variation in the instruments from one cue to the next, especially having that distorted guitar part in each one of them, or distorted synth part in each one of them. Either have more change to it, like what you've done with the rhythms work, I think. Let's change here. Yeah, there's enough change in the energy from one to the next that works, but hearing the common instruments in each one of them might get a little bit repetitive, even though they're changing their rhythmic approach each time. But you want to make sure that you have the opportunity to use a wider palette of instruments to provide more of a unique sound to each bot. And three stingers. All right. I think the first one. I think that one works the best. It has a bit of modulation to it, but it wraps up pretty quickly. This one is a bit too low in volume and intensity. That could probably come up a little bit. You probably want to avoid little musical phrases like that, because it might not be in the key of the rest of your music, or you have to make sure it is, and so I'd probably go more in the direction of this first one here. All right, looks like we have made it through all four of those. We had great examples to check out, and good approaches overall. most of what was discussed is the formatting of the music to prepare it to work in the game, how the music shifts and transitions from ambient to action, the looping of the files, how it builds and recedes back down, how the stingers work against the ambient and the action cue. So that it gives us some good ideas that to if we need to make any changes and a new direction to follow. All right. So that is our peer review for the Angry Bots composition from week 3. Next thing we will jump into here is the new assignments for week 4. But first, before I do that, let me take a quick pause. Hold on. Let me know if you have any questions so far. All right. I think we're set up here. So, as mentioned earlier, in week 4, we are mainly focused on wrapping up all of our projects, creating a video capture of the work that you've done, showing it off to other folks in the class, and doing the composition description for Angry Bots to finish everything out. So we're going to start here with a discussion of your approach for the sound design for Angry Bots, where the process or the general workflow of getting it done is very much the same as 2D platformer. It's just a whole new series of sounds to create. So the first thing that I would suggest you do is get access to the original sounds and put them into a Logic session so that you can build your own sounds while referencing the originals. So when you download this assignment, you get the PDF, very similar to a 2D platformer. You can, now with this game, with Angry Bots, it's a fun opportunity for sound design because you have robots, you have weapons, you have rocket launchers and electricity bolts and explosions and all sorts of fun, interesting sound design topics or tasks for the game. And it allows for some really interesting design. The this type of game with lots of big metal impacts and explosions. We don't necessarily expect you to go take a sledgehammer to your car or wreck it or anything or blow it up to record for the sake of the project, but instead we can use library sources from weststarmusic.com or freesound.org to actually gather some really good source material. So there are a lot of explosions in this game, and there are a lot of doors, like Star Trek kind of doors that automatically open and close. So you get screenshots and a small description of each one of the cues, so we know what it refers to. And then playing through the game, you should get an idea of what all the sounds generally sound like, or what they sound like as a whole. Here is your asset list for Angry Bots. These are the 22 sounds that you need to create for this game project. And you can find the originals of these in the game itself. Drag those out of the way. Let me go get a copy of Angry Bots. Something that looks like this. All right, here is the game application, and you can navigate to a specific location in that app and pull out the original sound effects. And eventually you are going to create your own sound effects and replace them in that same location. This is very much the same thing that you did in 2D Platformer, so there really shouldn't be that much new, except for all of the interesting sounds that you'll be creating. So we hit Show Package Contents to get access to this Contents folder. In there you will find, let's see, Data, you'll find Streaming Assets, and you will find a Sound Effects folder. More than likely, if you look at this here, well, it depends on if you've actually you have created the music, and if you've actually put it into the game. Your 7 music files would end up in this music folder, but if you go into the sound effects folder, this is all of the original sound design from the game. So I'm going to take all of those files, and I think we're good with this for now. Let's get Logic to give me a new session. Alright, so what I'm going to attempt is to take these 22 sound files, audio files, and actually put it on this track here. Use all files on one track, yes. Now, once you have all of the original sound effects in the game, in your DAW, you can create a couple of blank tracks below where you will do your own sound design. And you probably come in here and separate these out a bit so that you have some room to develop whatever you needed. And then I would suggest that you go find a group of sounds and bring them back and edit them together to create the final sounds that you need. Go off and do a bit of searching and find lots of different things that might work, and then bring it back into your DAW and edit them all together until you find the combination that does work. What you shouldn't do is say, okay, I need first one, ambience, SFX _ambience _exterior _rain. So I need a rain loop. So I go out and I go search for a rain loop. I bring it back in. I edit it. I name it, or loop it, and I name it, and I bounce it out. Then I want to go to an interior hum. So I go back to the sound effects library, find the file, edit the file, loop it, bounce it. And then I go that process over and over again. You probably don't want to repeat that same thing over and over again. Go find the sound, go bring it in, edit it, process it, name it, bounce it out. Instead, I would go find a lot of similar types of sounds. In this game, there is a lot of explosions, and there is a lot of those automatic doors. So you can find a lot of different door sounds. Please go, something that is good to search for in this case is hydraulics and pneumatics, actuators, sometimes maybe servos, can give you some of the whirring and opening and closing sounds that you need for that door. So we're going to take some time here to listen to all of these sounds, wherever they may be. There we go. All right, I'm going to set this up, make sure that we can all hear this. All right, let's see. Make sure I can hear this. All right, that seemed to broadcast. Can you give me a heads up in the chat that you can hear that? That is working. Yes, excellent. Thank you. All right, so we have airlock door open and close. These are the circular doors in Angry Bots that kind of unlock and then open and close. Close. Here is the open. A lot of times with door opening and closings, you can get away with it by reversing one for the other, right? So you find the open, you reverse it, and you get the close. Often isn't just like a one-to-one, you just reverse it and that's it. A lot of times with the closes and the opens, there might be a ka-chunk of the lock as it opens or closes. So make sure you find a couple of elements there that represent both opening and closing. Exterior rain, pretty simple. So rain sample. Everywhere where you are outside of the robot factory, it is raining in the game. So we need it doesn't need to be a really long loop. I think that's like a 30-second long rain loop. Probably doesn't need to be that long, but you don't want to hear the same raindrops over and over and over again. Interior hum. This is when you are inside of the factory, and it is heard once you kind of go through the airlock door. Destroyed explosion for the flying buzzer. Now each one of the robots has its own destroyed explosion when you defeat it. So a big loud impact. Flying buzzer. This is when it attacks you. So you'll come up with some sort of energy blast or bolt sound. Patrol mech. These are the big two-legged walking robots. There's the alert sound when it recognizes you. There is its destroyed explosion. Let me make sure I can turn this down somehow. Check, 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 check. No, that didn't seem to work. Oh, where am I? Right here. All right, I'm going to turn this down and see that. See how it affects. I renamed it. That didn't work. Okay, I think that turned it down a little bit. Anyway, it's a extremely large explosion, the biggest one in the game. So you can, I mean, this is the biggest boss. Well, let me turn myself back up. This is the biggest boss battle. So you want them to be pretty epic overall. Patrol mech footstep left and right. Maybe. I think they cheated and just put the same sound there. So you can make your footsteps, you have a left footstep and a right footstep, make them large and intimidating so you can hear them coming down the hallway. Patrol mech missile explosion. This is when the mech shoots you. So it's a very loud, strong impact. Shoot missile. Right, that's when they fire the missile at you. Spider alert sound when it jumps awake. Simple alert. Destroyed explosion. This is when you destroy the spider. And spider proximity. Now, this is the sound that occurs when the spider bots are coming after you and they start beeping faster and faster. So you will hear beep, 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 and just according to proximity will determine how fast the beep happens. For your sound, you just need to make one quick beep. Very simple. The game takes care of the rest. The game will actually repeatedly trigger it depending on how close or far away that robot is. Spider self-destruct. This is when the spider self-destructs and blows up on its own. I think that's a pretty weak explosion, but there you go. Interior doors opening and closing. Can kind of hear the pneumatic arm opening and returning back. Locked door opening. Pretty simple hum there. Doesn't really even sound like a door opening, but maybe something that's kind of electrically charged that's rising up. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is when you hold down the mouse trigger to fire. Now, one thing to point out there, jumping back over here, I think the sample's way over here. Yeah. Here's the sound file in Logic playing back. You would probably be best to follow the timing of these shots in this wave file very closely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 shots here, and I think it's very closely timed with the muzzle flash animation in the game. So you probably want to pay attention to that and kind of follow the rhythm of that particular sound. Where did I go? So that's player shooting, and the last one is terminal hacked. That's when you stand next to the computers and hack the terminal to give you access to the locked doors. So those are all 22 of the sounds that you will be building. Take those, import them into a Logic session, spend some time organizing everything, and just go out and search a whole bunch of sounds, bring them back in, edit them, prepare them, and name them and bounce them out ready for this project, just always make sure that you hit mute up here before you bounce to make sure that the original sounds don't make it in the game. All right, so hopefully that'll give you some good insight into where we're going with sound design for Angry Bots. Let me know if you have any questions. Your next assignment is the composition description for Angry Bots, just in the same way that the same approach that you had for 2D platformer. Same kind of information generally. Create a video capture, which we'll talk about here in just a sec. Take a session screenshot. Melody and harmony, give you information about your melody, harmony, and rhythmic approach. List all of the instrumentation. This might be a little bit more because of the fact that it doesn't have to be similar between each one. Information about each one of the cues, ambient cue, action cues, and the example cues, and then a screenshot of how to set everything up, along with a screenshot of how your mix is doing. So that should be pretty comfortable by this point. After going through one round of those, you should be familiar with the type of information that you provide. And our last assignment, well, I don't know if it's actually the last one, but kind of wraps everything up. You will be doing a final game capture for both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. So by the end of this week, you will have completed all of the music and all of the sound effects and implementation of 2D platformer. You will have completed all of Angry Bots and sound effects and some other effects overall. And we want to be able to show this off and be able to share the work that you've done. So we have the project's ready to go. You've already created one capture for 2D platformer. And maybe you have, well, actually, no, when you did that, you had both music and sound effects in there. Maybe there's some revision, maybe there's something that you changed. You'll create another video capture for 2D platformer, or let's call it a final one, probably a better way of saying it. Then you'll also create another video capture for 2D platform. No, I said that. For Angry Bots. And both of those are going to be uploaded to YouTube. No, where did I go? Uploaded to YouTube and shared in a discussion post. Then we get to see everybody's final results and everybody's final version of 2D platformer and Angry Bots that they worked on throughout the month with their music, their sound effects, everything custom. Your game captures are probably, well, they are the most useful form to show off your game music work. The music and the game application itself, you have a 2D platformer application, you have an Angry Bots application, and those are yours. Those are for yours to show off and email around, add them to your demo reels, post them up somewhere and share them, like put them in Dropbox and share the link. People can download them, check it out, play the game, but there are a couple of roadblocks to all of that. The main one is that they need to have a Mac in order to play the game. And you aren't in control of their gaming experience directly. I mean, yes, you're part of the music aspect of it, but how they play the game and what they're doing in there and how they hear the sound effects is unique. And there's no telling that in a day, or no, well, in a week or a month or more likely a year or 2 years or 5 or 10 years from now, there's a chance that the application won't necessarily run on your computer. There'll be different hardware, different software, different operating systems, and Apple's kind of notorious for forcing people to catch up with all of their new versions of software while leaving certain things behind. So What I'm saying is there's a somewhat of a good chance that that application isn't going to be the best form to show everything off as being the only one. It's great when you know that they're gonna how they're gonna check it out and how it's gonna work, but a video is very straightforward. Nobody has any issues with clicking on a link and watching a video. With the download, there's another problem with the distributing the game application is people, rightfully so, don't necessarily feel very comfortable with finding some random file on the internet and downloading it, playing it on their computer. Even if it is you and they completely trust you, and or you're like applying for a job or talking to a client, sometimes they're quite hesitant to run applications on their computer. So a video, nobody really has an issue with clicking on a link and watching a video. And that video is going to stick around longer. A really good example is I have final bounces and video files and audio, like the final stereo 2-track WAV file of a lot of different projects that I've worked on, but I don't have the original sessions that work on any system anymore. They're just either too old in their versions, or to put them back together, it's a different computer and the plugins are all different, and to put them all back together might be a bit of a puzzle. Same sort of thing with the game, and being a piece of software, there's a chance that it just is not going to work someday. So having a video representation of that, you're pretty safe to assume that it's going to work for a pretty good amount of time. Then the other side of that is you also then get to control the gaming experience. It's you playing the game. You show off the best, everything that you want to show off in the best light that you can. So they're not getting frustrated by the game, and so they hate the game, they hate your music. Or they love the game so much that they haven't even been paying attention to your music. Or those sorts of things come in every once in a while. So having a video capture that shows off your work, shows off the final version of everything, and puts it in a nice, easy package with a bow on top that you can send out to a client, that stuff is very, very valuable. So this assignment will have you, you'll first finish both, well, you've already finished 2D Platformer, but finish 2D Platformer, finish Angry Bots, make sure everything works as you intend, and then create the strongest presentation of the music and sound effects as you can. And then you're going to post it up on YouTube. You'll share it in this discussion post, can comment and see how everybody's kind of final version ended up, and then add it to your longer term demo reel. Here in the chat, no matter how much I practice playing the games, I'm still terrible and my videos look terrible because of it. What do I do? For the purpose of this class, I am not grading that in any way. For that portion of that question, it's perfectly fine. Just as you don't have to play the game with any skill, just hopefully you can reach the point where you trigger the different pieces of music. Even if you die over and over and over again, that's the main thing that I'm looking for. In the larger sense, in a professional version of it, I've had people ask other people just to play the game who have a bit more skill. I mean, I've had let's say students of another generation that have kids or grandkids that come in and just play their games for them to show it off. So I don't know if that's if that's possible, or if you have somebody else that could come in and in the professional situation. Again, for this project, it's not a concern. But if you want to have some sort of like base level of, hey, look, this is cool and I want to show it off and this is how it all works, having somebody come in and do it. It's like having somebody better than you sing your song as a songwriter. Like I can write you a song, but I'm not the person to sing it for you. So that kind of thing can work out. So no, it's not have any effect on your grade by any means. The only I guess another thing to point out with the video captures is I'm not grading you much on the content of the video as much as the process of getting it done. By having a video with your music and sound effects working in it, shows that you have composed the music, you have created the sound effects, you have implemented into the game, you've set it up so that it's working, you've tested it out, and you've been able to create a video capture. So if at another time it was a different game or a different computer or video or any of that, the process is still there. So the actual content of the video, what you show off, how you show it off, is really up to you, and that's the demo that that you want to use to demonstrate your work. I'm not even really going to be counting to make sure that I hear all 22 of the WAV files and all 7 of the music files, because with the music I know that there's an element of randomization, like the stingers. You may not ever get stinger 2 to play for some reason. It just never randomly plays it. And the other thing to say is that I have a recommended limit of, I think it says 60 seconds, and I've pushed it on to be like 60 to 90, maybe to 2 minutes. Depends on what you want to, how you want to show it off, but I leave that part more up to you. But as long as you have the video and it works, then we can show that you've done the part that I'm really more interested in is the skills that you do have of composition and production of your music and realizing a music soundtrack for a game. The video is just the proof of all of that. So, and we get to see everybody's different version of it. I always think that the final result is greater than the sum of its parts, because when we do peer review, I certainly go through it with a microscope and I pick out all sorts of stuff that, and sometimes it's certainly open for debate as to what works and what doesn't work with the music and the soundtrack and your overall approach. And that's really where the client relationship comes in, and this is kind of a practice round of all of that. But the real purpose here is to give you, the tools and the means to be able to create this final version, a kind of a definitive version that you can, that you're willing and proud to show off to other folks as you get started in the industry. So, final game captures gives everybody an opportunity to see everybody else's work, and that's where I was going with that. The sum of the parts. The when I tear things apart in peer review, and we go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and the sound effects are. They're actually very entertaining to grade. They're either really cool sounding or they're really funny sounding or whatever it is. But when you put it all together in the final version with the video capture, and what you're adding in there is the computer being able to control everything, and you have the interactivity and the randomization, it ends up being cooler than in the individual part. The whole thing together works, like the sound effects work against the music, and they kind of work back and forth against each other, and you get that interactivity. So the video is a great way of showing all that off. That should be it from me, and please let me know if you have any questions on the Angry Bots project or any of the composition elements or sound design for this week, and how we're going to wrap everything up. If you do have any issues or questions or troubles that you've encountered thus far up through the class, well, this is the time to get it all fixed and figured out. We want to make sure, please come to us with any sort of issues that you might have so we can resolve it before the end of the month, before you move on to the next class. So, yeah, that's what I have for you today. I'll stick around for a few minutes afterwards if you have any questions. But other than that, have a good rest of your day, and we will meet again on Friday. Thanks a lot.